Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much, Kim, and everyone else who thought of bringing me to you today. By way of a very brief introduction, because I know I don't have a lot of time, I am a planner. I have been a planner since probably before some of you were born. I started work in 1984 and have had a number of different planning roles, but I'm not here today as anything other than an experienced land use planner. I'm not representing a particular organization or interests. I'm just someone who's been to a lot of public meetings over the years, a lot of council meetings, a lot of hearings, and so there are a few things I'd like to share with you that might be helpful to you as you bravely go forward to make your views known on an important topic. So first off, I would like to say that as a planner, I always value the input that the public provides. Sometimes I think people are discouraged from taking part in these things because they think, oh, it's not going to make a difference. Nobody's listening. I'm not an expert. Don't feel that way. For me, as a professional planner, I really value hearing from people who are concerned about what goes on in their community. So don't let that intimidate you. Secondly, I'd like to say that in all of the presentations that I've heard over the years, some have been more effective than others, and so it's great that you're having this session. And as I said, don't let lack of experience intimidate you, because someone speaking genuinely from the heart about a concern about their community is always valuable to me, and I'm sure it's valuable to counselors. So let's get started right off the bat. Number one, be polite. In the passion of the moment, you may want to raise your voice. You may want to make grand statements. You may even want to mutter things under your breath that you shouldn't, that your mother told you should not to. But, you know, you must be polite, because you don't want to run the risk that, you know, someone in IT is allowed to cut you off because you said something you shouldn't. And similarly, if you get a question by a member of council in response to your presentation, maybe they're asking for clarification, or occasionally they may want to challenge something that you said. Again, remain polite. Don't get aggravated by the question. Grit your teeth and very politely say, well, thank you, Counselor so-and-so. And you will use your name, not so-and-so. And thank them for the question. And that also buys you time to formulate an answer. And just, again, be very polite and respectful. And if you don't understand their question also, feel free to say, I'm very sorry, Counselor, you know, I didn't catch that, or could you clarify what you're asking me? There's nothing wrong with that. You're not playing dumb. You just want to make sure that if it's a difficult question, you want to make sure you're giving the answer that it deserves. So secondly, I would say, you're not going to get much time. That's always the case at a public meeting, at a council meeting. You know, you have 5 minutes, maybe you have 10 minutes, and they have to stick to that, obviously, if there's going to be a large number of delegations. Try to practice ahead of time. You know, put your notes together and then read it, you know, to someone in your family or a friend or something, and time yourself. You may think you've only got 5 minutes worth of content and you're still at it 20 minutes later. So you're going to have to make sure that you stick to that time, practice it. It also makes you feel more comfortable. You know, if you're just, you know, your hands are quivering and you're reading your notes and you've never read it before, it may not be as impactful. So try to find a few minutes, read it to people, hone what you're going to say, and then you'll get absolutely everything you really wanted to say across to the audience. Have a clear opening statement. Don't just launch right into your points. Have a clear thing that sets them up for what's going to follow. It could be as simple as, I am here today because I want to object to the proposal to do X. Or I'm here today to support the proposal, but with the following exceptions. You know, whatever it might be, whatever position you're going to take, have that clear opening statement. It's a lead-in, the reasons that you're going to give for that statement. So try to have that punchy opening line that says, here I am, this is what I have to say. And then you can go on with specifically what you're supporting, what you would like to see different, or what you're opposing. Because there may be some middle ground. Maybe you're not entirely opposed to something. Maybe you're opposed to some aspect of it. However, if something was changed, maybe you could support part of it. The challenge for a council is if everyone gets up and says, I object, I object, I object, I object, and there's no room for further discussion, maybe they start to tune out. I've heard 55 people say no. They haven't given me a reason why, and they seem unmovable. There's absolutely, we as a council, there's nothing we can do to make these folks happy. But maybe there is. Maybe there's some element of what's being proposed that you're okay with. However, these are the things that you're not okay with and would like to see changed. And similarly, if I don't know if this process allows that kind of time, you can indicate whether you think a decision should be postponed. I mean, I know overall the growth planning exercise, there's deadlines that councils have to meet. But if there is an opportunity for more time, for discussion, for more dialogue, you know, say you would support that, or maybe you don't. So just be clear on those things. I always find it compelling too is, why were you moved to come to the meeting? Maybe you're a good citizen of the municipality, you go about your business, you pay your taxes, you do your work, you mow your lawn, and you mind your own business. But something has caused you to come. You're terrified, you've never spoken in public before, but you are so moved by an issue that you've thrown all that aside to be here today. I find that very compelling as someone in the audience. You're saying to me, I don't do this as a regular thing. I'm not a lobbyist. I'm not an activist. I'm not a whatever. I am a person who is so moved by what you're deciding on today. I decided to get past all that, and I have come. And that is compelling. Also say, how does the issue affect you, your family, your property, personally? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe the growth area is way on the other side of town and you live up near the 401. Maybe it doesn't affect you directly. But if perchance it does impact you directly, and in some ways, of course, big planning issues like this affect everybody directly. But sometimes it's a situation where my property is right next to the area that is going to be growing. It's going to become urban. That's why I'm here. Or I'm here because I'm concerned. What concerns you specifically about what's happening? It could be you just want to say, I don't think it's good planning, or I think it's contrary to climate change objectives, or it's contrary to, whatever the reason. Try to give a reason or several reasons why you think this decision should go a certain way. The other thing that I find effective is if someone comes and says, I have spent every evening and the last 3 weekends reading all of the documents. I mean, maybe you didn't do that, but maybe you read something. You read a council report or a staff report or a technical document or something you heard in the news, whatever it is. Be able to say how you arrived at your position. Maybe you did a lot of work, maybe you did a little work, maybe it was just one thing you heard that said, that doesn't seem right to me, and that's what brought you here. So try to qualify how you arrived at your position. And as I touched on before, is there something positive that you could say? It's always hard if people just focus on the negative, and if there's something, some room for movement, some possible way that you could live with what is being proposed. You know, it's always good to show a reasonableness in your comments. So it just doesn't sound like, I don't care what you tell me, it's just going to be no. Maybe it's not. Maybe there's some middle ground or some aspect of what's being proposed that is okay to you. And then finally, I'll just say, have a conclusion. You could restate your opening comment, or you can have a slight variation on your opening comment, but remind them again what your position is on the subject matter, and thank them for the opportunity to speak, and indicate that you're happy to answer any questions. And that's it.
Wow, Nancy, thank you. In quick summary, I heard three things. I heard 3 Ps: be polite, personalize, and practice. Would you say those are kind of the keys that you were getting across to us?
Yes, but again, don't be afraid if your voice is cracking, if if your hands are shaking. That doesn't matter. We expect as people who attend these things that people will be uncomfortable, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't be afraid that you're somehow going to be chastised because your voice is quivering, or you had to stop and catch your breath because you're so excited about this. Don't worry about that. Just forge ahead and keep going.
Thank you. I personally found that very reassuring and very helpful. And I'd like to ask if we could hold questions until after Jane Fogel speaks. Then we can make sure we get both of our experts to answer the questions from their own perspectives. So I'm going to move on. Jane, are you ready to go? You're on mute, just so you know. Excellent.
Thanks for that. Trying to appear professional here.
Very professional.
Using my microphone. Yes, well, I want to thank Nancy for her presentation. We did not get together to talk about who was going to say what. And I can tell you that I agree with everything she said. But I'm going to try and give you some idea of what it feels like to be on the other side, listening to the presentations. So as a counselor, I want to hear from you. That's, we need your opinions. You're we really, as counselors, want to do the best for our community. We may all come at it from different priorities or points of view, but I don't know of any counselor who doesn't want to do the best for their community and doesn't want to represent them. So feel comfortable that you're invited to be there, and you're a necessary part of democracy, and for us knowing that we're on the right track. So some people want to hear you confirm what they're thinking, and other people are hoping for maybe some other delegations to confirm what they're thinking. Who knows? But you're playing an important role. If you haven't watched a council meeting, you'll know that you would maybe not know that it's a very controlled environment, that people only speak when they are given leave to speak by the chair. Once you're speaking, there'll be no interruptions. You've got your 5 minutes, and you can either use it all or not use it all. But at the end of that, though, you may be asked questions, at which point you're not on the clock anymore. So you don't need to rush your answers or worry about that. That's entirely up to council to ask questions or not. Sometimes whether you're asked questions depends where you are in the order. It may be that you're covering territory somebody else did and you don't get a question. It may be that after 30 delegations, they've stopped asking questions. Who knows? So don't take it one way or the other. But let's see. In your language, I would also say make sure you don't get into insulting anybody or attacking the integrity of either a counselor or the staff. I mean, even the staff is trying to do their best job. They're often under directions from higher up, who knows, but they are trying to do their job. They are listening. If you disagree with what somebody has either said in public or said in a council meeting or what is in a staff report, you can allude to those things, but don't mention names. So, you know, you could say, I heard it said that, or some counselors think or have expressed this, or the report said something that I disagree with, but not the people. And part of the reason is we're trying to bring people along to our way of thinking, and it's very hard to do if you've already insulted them. So don't go there. We're trying to win people over with logic and so on, but don't go negative on particular people. Now, as for feeling maybe a little anxious about being a delegate, I too was a delegation before being elected. And when I reflect back on my experience, I know that it helped that I had attended council meetings before and seen how they operate. See who asks questions, who doesn't, how do they frame them, and that sort of thing. So I was thinking that it might be a good idea if you haven't watched a council meeting or watched Delegates. We are now in a position where you can watch recordings of that. And perhaps the easiest one to find right now, and we might put the link to it somewhere, is that Oakville meeting of January the 18th. And give the time when the delegation started, because it was part of a longer meeting, and I think the delegation started about 3 hours in. But you would then just sort of see how it goes, what the process is, to give yourself some comfort that you know what's happening. Now that's just Oakville. If you want to see who the players are at a Halton Council meeting, you can also go and review one of their meetings if you like, just to see what sort of questions they ask and who asks them and who's not paying attention, that sort of thing. It's not as good as being there in person. When you're there in person, you can watch the people who aren't talking and get an idea what's going on. But I guess you just get the little heads. Yeah, speak from the heart. And use them. Okay, so the other thing about counselors is that they are ordinary people. To get elected, you don't have to be a planner. You don't need to be an expert in parks and recreation. You don't need to be an expert on roads or snow shoveling or anything. All you have to do is care about your community and get elected. So I don't have any expertise in those areas except what I've sort of picked up through the ages. But if you ever had a chance to talk to counselors one-on-one, for the most part, you'd find them easy to talk to and reasonable to talk with as well. So they are just people who've been chosen to look at things from the point of view of average people, more or less. So try not to be intimidated by them, although it is hard when you're going to be facing 24 of them, which is a crazy number, but that's what regional council is. Now, the other thing is, of course, you don't need to be an expert either, and counselors should not expect you to be an expert in anything, although they may ask you a question that seems to imply that, but you can simply say, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, or you know, I'm not an expert, you know, just from my own feelings or such and such, but you can add qualifiers if you like, if you're asked a question. But by all means, if you're uncomfortable with the question, or you feel there's a question that's trying to put you in a corner, you can just say, yeah, I don't think I can answer that question. Nobody can make you answer a question you don't want to, but you can certainly take a stab at it. So yeah, remember, you're walking into a situation in this case where about half the counselors already are on your team and half of them maybe not so much. So, but at least half of them will be in your corner cheering. Yeah, you've got 5 minutes to make your point. I'd say try not to make all the points. There are other people to make the other points. And it would get tiresome if everybody tried to cover everything. Like it would be very hard on the counselors at a certain point to continue listening. Even the other people waiting to speak will be getting anxious. Other people waiting to speak will think you stole their words. That's what I was going to say. So, you know, pick the thing that really moves you. Pick the thing that made you decide to do this extraordinary thing and do something for the first time, and go with that. And once again, it's not always what you don't want to see happen. It's a lot about what you do want to see happen. In the end, that's what counselors are going to have to do. They're going to have to do something. Maybe it's in the end your vision for how the community might look and feel and work going on, or what you might be proud of, or what how you want this to be for your grandchildren, whatever it is. It's going to be something that's meaningful, that will help move people and make you credible and make you somebody that the counselors can react in a positive way to. Yeah, I think those are the main things. It's all about people, and being clear with your message, practicing it, and not going too fast. People need to absorb what all these people are talking about. So I think I'll just leave it there, and we can go to questions.
That's great, Jane. Thank you very much. I think I heard something very similar to what Nancy said, in that making it passionate, the personalization, making it about what matters to you and why it matters to you, is something that might persuade them more than going through and identifying all the reports you've read and all the facts you've found. Is that true?
Now, I forgot to mention that if you are an expert in some area, let us know. Most people aren't, but we certainly do welcome people who have an area of expertise and would like to speak about that. That's very helpful, in fact. And if you can bring a few facts that you've researched, there's no problem with doing that. Just but sort of limit it to a particular area.
Right. Okay. We've already got a couple of questions that have come in. Both are very interesting. Excuse me. So if we could, I'd like to start with, I believe it was Ross, and I apologize if I've got your name wrong. According to provincial, regional, and municipal structures, how do we turn back the projected population numbers for 2050 that the province has put forward and we are now planning toward? I think what he's referring to might be the fact that we know that the numbers haven't been living up to the projections. Is there a way to do this? And Ross, if you've got something to add, please do so now.
No, you've clearly described the question. It seems to me, given the slowdown in immigration and bringing even people in as refugees, and the effect of the pandemic, those numbers are quite large when we consider doubling the population of many of the different municipalities within the region. I think they're just wrong, and I'm wondering, how do we appeal to turn that back?
I can answer that. So That's not the question of the day, Ross. It's a good question, but it is beyond the scope of municipalities to change that. And they have to deal with the numbers that they've been given. So there's just nothing we can do about it at the moment. You can voice an opinion that the numbers are too high or they should be something else, but that is not something that regional council will. They've got to deal with the number they've got. They've got to come up with a plan with a deadline to get that plan going. So it's a problem for another day.
Good point. Thank you, Jane. Ross, I hope that answers your question. The next question we had was, in regards to decisions or changes affecting you personally, do counselors take perspectives of people who are not personally affected seriously? We know we've had some rhetoric from counselors who say, why are people in Mississauga bothering me about this? Can you speak to that, Jane? And then maybe Nancy might have a perspective on this.
Yeah, so I think in your presentation, you should say why you think you should be there. And, obviously if it's climate change, then you have every right to be speaking about that. These decisions have an impact. Or if it's agriculture, it could be in the province or whatever, where we're having an impact on a system, then you draw that line of thinking into your presentation. If you were talking about roads in Halton Hills and you lived in Toronto, then you'd say, why are you here? That would be an obvious question. But you're there for a reason that you think it matters, then put that in your presentation.
Nancy, did you have anything to add to that?
Well, I could just say, I think that you could say to council that, as a taxpayer of the municipality, it is your expectation that councillors will take a broad and long view of current issues, such as, where to accommodate future growth and development. So from that basis alone, you have every right to say, well, I'm part of a larger municipality. What this council is doing is going to affect all of us. Maybe, yes, I don't live next door to the lands that might be urbanized, but I care about my municipality as you do, Councillor so-and-so. And so it is my expectation that you will act not in an individual interest, but in a broader interest for the betterment of the community for the long term. It's not just a, snap decision we're making today and we'll forget about it tomorrow, the condo will get built and whatever. No, this is bigger than that. So you want to say to them, I care about the whole municipality, whether I'm directly next door or not, and I expect you to make decisions which are in the best interest of the community as a whole, today, tomorrow, 50 years from now.
Thanks, Nancy. And while I have you, Louise, I see your hand up. Give me one more second. I'm going to ask Nancy a question while we have her. What is the proper way to address council when you start the delegation?
Typically it's, good morning or good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of council. That's very formal. And then if Councillor so-and-so asks you a question, don't say, oh, hey, Bob, say Councillor so-and-so, in response to your question. That formal, almost as if you were attending a hearing or something, or you were in court. It's all about decorum.
Just quickly, Mr. Chair, not worship or mayor?
No, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair is heading it. It's Chair Carr that heads up this council, guys. So that's why it's that in particular.
Right. Yeah.
So Louise,
And you
over
could say
to
Chair Carr.
Oh, sorry.
Chair Carr is fine too. Chair Carr and members of council.
Right.
Good.
Perfect. Thank you. Louise, did you want to ask a question before I move on to some of the others in the chat?
Yeah, I wanted to, Phil Pothen from Environmental Defense have said, we've got to get rid of exclusionary zoning bylaws. and to enhance density, and I'm all for that. But and I may be muddying the waters, so you can tell me to shut up if needs be. But the provincial government has just floated this task force on housing affordability, which really it talks about eliminating red tape and eliminating all zoning bylaws. In fact, they're sort of talking about gutting planning departments at the municipal level and having one easy set of rules on the provincial level. So in a way, this housing has nothing to do with housing affordability. It's just to cut the red tape for developers. So, being on this team, I've been all for intensification, but I don't like getting rid of every darn zoning bylaw. I mean, are we walking into a can of worms? I'm just asking that to Jane, with where the provincial government is sort of flying this idea of, getting rid of sort of planning departments at the local level.
I'm sure Nancy has a good perspective on that too, but Jane, go ahead.
Yeah, we've just been writing sort of a position paper that includes in it the idea of re-examining our zoning laws that are very exclusionary, with a view of adding some gentle density to existing areas, and as well looking at the greenfield areas that are currently they're not being developed, but they're within the current urban boundary. We're not saying what that should be, only that it should be examined as a way of adding some gentle density. We don't need to get into somebody else's report.
Okay, yeah.
That'll be a can of worms for a different day, but certainly we don't have enough time to deal with that. And they're a group that have floated something out there that hasn't even come to council yet. Maybe that they haven't even read it.
Okay, so that's helpful. Thank you.
Nancy, did you want to address that at all, or do you want to just leave that lie?
Well, I will say, in defense of planners across the province, because in the work that I do have occasion to talk to people in my profession across the province. We are all working as hard as we can to try and address red tape, because red tape makes more work for us as well. And so, I applaud the efforts to, look for those squeaky wheels, but I do believe that any planner worth their salt is doing their best to, assist in the decision-making process and the planning review of planning applications. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Nancy. Chris, I see you. I'm just going to ask a couple from the chat and come right back to you. So someone has asked, is the limit 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or does it vary? I believe the answer to that is 5 minutes at this regional council meeting, Jane and Nancy.
I haven't checked it.
Okay, I read the bylaws today. It's 5 minutes. That's what I've seen. Who knows what they'll actually say? If they may address it in fact, they will address it specifically when you go to register. It will clearly articulate on that page whether or not you have 5 or 10 minutes. So don't worry, it'll be there. And the only other question I wanted to talk about before we get any further was any tips about doing electronic presentations, reading notes, using microphones. I mean, this technology is new for a lot of people. They're a little nervous about it. And I know that when I first delegated at Milton, I had everything on my screen set up. And then when they brought me into the meeting, it all went poof, and I didn't know how to get back to it. So maybe Nancy and or Jane, can you speak about that?
Well, maybe I'll start off by saying, expect the unexpected. It happens. So if you can have a backup, something goes wrong with your computer, could you join the meeting by your phone instead? If you're comfortable with switching from one piece of technology to another, sometimes you could do that, sometimes you can't. But make sure you have your notes, on a piece of paper, so they can still hear you, but maybe your presentation has disappeared into the cloud somewhere and you can't get it. just, look at your paper notes in front of you. Always go low tech as well as high tech if you can. Be prepared that that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, you can politely ask at the start, can you hear me okay? And if they say, yeah, that's fine, launch into it. Don't worry about it. And they'll tell you if you've started to fade because you're nervous and you're muttering into your notes. They'll say, oh, could you speak up? They're not harassing you. They do want to hear from you. So just take a moment. Okay, adjust your microphone, carry on. Don't let that rattle you. And if worse comes to worse and everything fails you, you dropped your notes in a glass of water and your computer is kaput and you can't find your presentation, just charge on, keep going, just plow ahead. Don't let that rattle you at all, because it does happen. I was in a meeting once and the power went out, and fortunately my battery lasted long enough to continue, but it does happen.
Yeah. Jane, anything to add before we go to Chris?
Yeah, now I haven't been a delegation, so I haven't been through the being on that side of it. But what I have seen is that people get called and they don't come on, and there's a glitch. But they always come back to a person that they've missed. If there's somebody missing, I don't know if they went to the bathroom or something, their name came up, that the clerk will go back and look for you again before the meeting is done. We certainly want everybody to speak. And we know there are problems with technology. I've had to go to my phone instead of my laptop. But anyway, there should be instructions in advance of the meeting from the clerk.
Yes.
That will tell you what the process is and how you get called upon, and then when they make you able to speak, when you're the person on. That should all come from clerks in advance. If you have questions before the meeting from whatever you've been given, call the clerk.
Yeah. Great.
And try to find a quiet place from which you can give your remarks. I know that's hard sometimes, everybody's working at home. You may have a full house, you may have pets and children and, things going on in the background. If you can try and find a quiet place in your home, turn off the soccer game or the Olympic race or whatever it is that's going on in your house so that they can focus on you and what you have to say.
Perfect. And while we've got you on this topic, I see that Chris's hand is down, but we have Liz up. But I do want to just go a little further on this because people want to know about using slides or presentations, and they also want to know about written delegations. So can we talk about those two things, please?
Yeah, so slides, once again, the clerk would then allow you to share your screen. So you just have to request it.
That depends. In Oakville, when I delegated with slides, they wanted them sent in advance, and they wanted me to give the instructions about next slide. They didn't let me share my screen.
That happens in Milton too, to be clear. So I've never delegated at the region during this pandemic, so I can't speak to what that is.
You're probably right, because our regular delegations, the consultants and so on, don't usually run their own slides.
Right. So you will have to send them in advance, and do let the clerk know you have them, because otherwise they won't be able to line them up with your delegation. And what about written delegations? If we all know that there's no way to predict exactly what time you're going to come up in the list of delegates, even if you see the list in advance, you don't really know what time that's going to be. However, if we want to submit a written delegation, is there anything we need to know specifically about that?
I mean, the way it used to go is that we would get a bunch of paper on our desks when we arrived at the meeting that would have written delegations on them, and often they were circulated ahead of time. It's all a little bit different now. I know there have been all kinds of different submissions by groups that have not come to me yet. So I've just asked the clerk to start circulating them via another attachment to the agenda program. So then if he starts doing that, then there's often an addendum agenda, that something that comes in late would be there. I guess for people to read at a later time. But it's better if they arrive earlier and you can read them in advance of the meeting. So if you're going to do something like that, get it in sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's definitely, to speak about this particular issue we're facing right now, we are looking for in-person delegations. But if you're not comfortable, a written delegation is better than no delegation. Nancy, do you have anything to add to that?
I would just say, don't feel that you have to have something glossy and high tech and balloons floating in and out and things, scrolling across the screen. Some people like all of the whiz bangs, but it doesn't have to be that. You could have one slide with those, 5 key things you want to say. I do find sometimes that, an overly excited presentation with lots of things going on is actually distracting from what you're saying. They're looking at the screen and the colors and the pictures and the whatnots, and they're not listening to what you're saying. And honestly, it's just as fine to simply say, here is what I think, and maybe just have one slide with those points on it. So don't feel if you're not comfortable with all of the elements of PowerPoint, that's okay. Just, again, speak from the heart, clearly, slowly, politely, but, get your message across.
Great, thank you. Liz, you have a question. Please unmute and go ahead.
Jane, this was for you. I heard what you said about, not using people's names when you're doing your delegation. But I just wanted to know what you thought of this. So I had an incident where we were trying to get the natural heritage system, the best possible natural heritage system put in here in Niagara. And a bunch of councillors were concerned about the impact it would have on agricultural lands. And so the head planner at one point was asked by one of the councillors, and he said it will have no impact on the agricultural lands. But I know his answer got missed. And at the next meeting on the same subject, people were asking about it again. And I also heard in the interim, a lot of councillors were concerned about that. So when I made my delegation, I just noted that at the previous meeting, one of the councillors had asked, and I named him by name, the senior planner, and this was his response. And I know when my delegation was done, the chair said, well, since she named you out loud, what do you have to say about it? And of course, he confirmed that he said what I said he said. But was that how else would I prove that it was a legitimate source if I didn't say that it was the senior planner who said it? Is that okay when I'm directly quoting someone and not trying to throw someone under the bus?
Yeah, because, you've named a person with specifics that they said it without saying this horrible person. This is what happened. It's a fact. So
it was a public meeting.
Yeah, that's what was said.
Okay.
You could say the senior planner, or you could, call the person by their position if you wanted to soften it a little bit.
But then Bradley wouldn't have had the chance to say directly to Giles, did you actually say this? Which he did.
Yeah, so, there's exceptions to the rule.
And one other thing that I wanted to say is I often find that it's important that I mention that I've read a certain report, or that I quote back a policy from within the community or the region's policy, because that at least tells the councillors that I've done some homework and I know something about what's going on. So I just thought that might be a useful tip for people too. Let councillors know you've done a little bit of homework.
Absolutely. Do that for sure. You don't have to, but if you've done it, that's a good thing.
That's a good point. Cecil Young stipulates here, when you refer to a person by name or title, you are inviting a response from that person. It's normal protocol. So be careful. You may not want to hear the response from that person you're naming. So just to keep that in mind. Anyway, I think I've gotten all the question. No, I see more hands. Liz, sorry, Chris, go ahead, please.
Yeah, Chris Hitchcock in Oakville. In this particular case, asking for a limit to urban boundaries is also asking municipal and regional governments to do a change in planning that may be unwelcome to some people. And one of the things for me anyway that is the next step once we get past this is going to be finding ways to make that work easier for local governments. So finding ways to pitch gentle density, finding ways to show people how having garden secondary dwelling units are positive and not negative and all of that stuff. I know that a lot of times those kind of council decisions, they're out on their own. And I'm not sure if there's a way to somehow convey that at some level, these groups that have been so active also have their backs to some extent. That in some ways, this is the easy bit, and the harder bit is to bring people around to different ways of thinking about how we're going to continue to build our communities. So I sort of took my hand down and put it up, and took it down and put it up, because it doesn't belong at a delegation meeting in some ways, but it also seems like a piece of the messaging that I think would make it easier for some counselors to go along with this.
I could say a couple of things. I think in response to that, I think that all that is entirely true. Sometimes it's simply giving counselors and staff examples of good development, good gentle density, good low impact development. This isn't new. This has been around everywhere for a long time. And there may be certain examples that you've come across in your travels of a development in Toronto, a development in Kingston, a development in Portland, or wherever it might be. And you can share these examples to say, look, this achieved a density of X. Isn't this beautiful? Isn't this wonderful? Everybody loves it. It fit right into the neighborhood, and it provided housing for, X many people. Sometimes it's just to say it is possible. Here's an example of where this worked. The other thing I found, and this was some years ago, and I can't remember who did this work, but it was a way of presenting graphically what density looks like. We may all think that density is a 20-story condo. That's the only way you can achieve a density of X. But there may be all kinds of combinations. And so if you had someone put together 3 examples of density, all of which accommodated exactly the same number of people, but in 3 different forms, that's another way of saying, you may be thinking there's no point, it's only going to be a 20-story condo. Everybody's going to object to that because they don't want to see it. But in fact, there are other ways to achieve that density and have a simple graphic which shows this was, 20 persons per hectare, this was 20, this was 20, but they're all different built forms so that people will go, oh, I only thought it was going to be a 20-story condo, and I can't live with that. No, in fact, there's other ways to do it. And finally, another simple way of achieving density is maybe just through simple zoning changes. Maybe rather than putting seniors into, long-term care centers, you allow 5 seniors, 3 cats and a dog and a caregiver to live in a, 4-bedroom bungalow, and suddenly you've achieved density. You didn't change a thing. It's the same house, the same garden, same driveway, but you've allowed a caregiver to live in, and you have allowed people who are unrelated to one another live in a house. Boom, additional density. The province didn't have to spend money on a long-term care center, and there it is. Nobody even knows it's happening. So there's just, long story short, giving council the way to see that density can be achieved in a number of different ways.
Very true. Jane, did you want to add to that? I want to ask one more question of you both
Yeah.
before we leave. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, those are great ideas. But I would just point to the videos that are on our website, have some information about gentle density in the webinars that are there. And there's going to be another webinar for CFUW Oakville that's going to be dealing with this question as well, coming up later this month, I believe. So
Whose website are you talking about, Jane?
For the Stop Sprawl Halton website. Go to videos.
There's also some on the Halton Hills Climate Action too. But we have a link to that. So if I could ask a really good question that I saw come up, rather than repeat others' words, would it be better for us, referring to SSH, I believe, for us to get organized and reduce the number of delegates to speak and just focus on content?
Well, I always think it's a good idea.
I wouldn't reduce it. Numbers are good. Numbers are good. You do want to cover everything. I guess, if we had an idea of what each of our delegates was going to talk about, maybe that's good. But I don't know if you even need that. Like, they had 78 delegations in Hamilton. I don't know that they were all over the map, it was good that people took their own personal view of it, because like, I listened to them all, and in order to listen to all of that, you have to hear something a little bit different each time. Even if it's kind of covering the same thing, but comes from a slightly different spot, then it's still interesting and good, and adds up that 10 people talked about this and 4 talked about that. And okay, it's almost like taking a poll. But anyway, Nancy, you had a comment on it.
Well, I think I was just going to echo exactly what you said, that if people can tackle it from different perspectives, that keeps the listeners engaged. It's not everybody saying the same thing over and over. Somebody tackled it from a policy perspective, somebody from a traffic perspective, somebody from a farming perspective. It doesn't matter if there's some overlap, but if you keep coming at them from different directions, it gives a different context to the issue, that it's so broad and so impactful to so many different areas of planning, that they have to take that into consideration.